My name is Michael. I'm 52 years old, and not long ago I realized that the price of my dignity was exactly the cost of a generic bar of soap. While my siblings toasted with champagne on the deck of a cruise paid for by my parents, I stood holding that cheap piece of glycerin in front of the mirror, realizing that to my own blood I was nothing more than the inconvenience who stayed behind to take care of the remnants of an empire they only knew how to waste. In that moment, as the artificial lavender scent filled my nose, I made a decision there was no turning back from. If they saw me as disposable, I would make sure their lives of luxury dissolved faster than that soap under a stream of boiling water. There were no shouts, no dramatic scenes at the family dinner. There was only my sepulchral silence as I slipped the gift into my pocket and smiled one last time at the cameras recording my parents' generosity. That night, while they checked their first-class tickets to Europe, I reviewed bank accounts, property records, and the tax secrets my father had entrusted to me for years, believing I was too loyal to ever use them. He was wrong. Loyalty ends when respect disappears, and mine went down the drain along with the foam from that miserable gift. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For more than 2 decades, I was the son who never caused problems. While my brothers, Andrew and Daniel, dedicated themselves to living the life my father's connections allowed them, I stayed in the city, working side by side in the family business. My father always said I was his right hand, his trusted man, the one who kept the foundations strong while the others went out to explore the world. I accepted that role with quiet pride. I handled logistics, audits, dealt with difficult suppliers, and made sure cash flow never stopped. My life was reduced to long hours, perfectly pressed shirts, and the satisfaction of watching the family wealth grow under my management. I didn't mind that they were the visible faces at social events. I knew that without me, the engine would stop. Andrew is older by 2 years. He was always the charismatic one, the one who knew exactly what to say to get what he wanted. My father saw him as a reflection of his own youth, even though Andrew had never lifted a box or reviewed a spreadsheet in his life. Daniel, the youngest, was the absolute favorite. At 40, he was still asking for loans he never repaid, justifying them with absurd ventures that failed before their first month. My parents looked at them with a mixture of admiration and pity, a dangerous combination that always ended in a signed check, meant to help them take off. I, on the other hand, was the steady one. The one who didn't need help, the one who was always available when my mother needed a ride home from the hospital, or when my father needed someone to sign legal documents on a Sunday afternoon. The atmosphere at family dinners was always the same. Andrew talked about his connections, Daniel about his grand plans, and my parents listened with an attention they never gave me. I sat at the end of the table, observing. I didn't need to be the center of attention, but after so long, you start to notice the cracks in how you're treated. My parents celebrated their birthdays with extravagant parties, trips to luxury resorts in the Caribbean, or brand new cars under the excuse that they needed a push. I received a pat on the shoulder and a thanks for keeping an eye on everything, Michael. My financial stability was the result of my own effort, but deep down, I hoped for a gesture that confirmed my sacrifice for the family business carried the same emotional weight as my brother's whims. My relationship with my parents was strictly functional, though I fooled myself into thinking it was built on mutual respect. My father, a 70-year-old man whose gaze could still intimidate anyone, treated me more like a chief operations officer than a son. My mother, always elegant and distant, limited herself to smiling and asking whether I had reviewed the accounts for the country house. There was no warmth, only expectations. I was the family's insurance policy, the one who would keep everyone from ending up in ruin if things went wrong. And for years, I felt comfortable in that position. I believed family justice would arrive naturally, that they saw my value. Last year, the business experienced record growth thanks to a contract I personally negotiated over months. It was an absolute victory. My parents were radiant. Andrew and Daniel, of course, showed up at the office to celebrate, already talking about how the extra money would allow them to upgrade their lifestyles. I only asked for a weekend off, the first in 2 years. At that time, my 52nd birthday was approaching, a meaningful number. My brother's birthdays also fall in the same month. There were rumors of a special celebration. My parents spoke about life-changing gifts, gratitude, and honoring the family name. For the first time, I allowed hope to slip into my pragmatism. I thought maybe, finally, they would give me the place I deserved. Maybe the family trip they kept mentioning would include public recognition of my work. It could be you, the child who stays behind, who takes care of aging parents, who keeps the lights on while others take the credit, the one who believes loyalty is a currency that gains value over time, when in reality, for some people, loyalty is simply a free service they take for granted. I was at the peak of my career. I felt in control of everything, and I didn't see the blow coming. I didn't realize that to them, my effort wasn't merit, it was obligation, and that my presence was as ordinary and utilitarian as the air they breathed. I was about to learn that at my own family's table, I wasn't a guest of honor, but part of the furniture. The day of the celebration arrived. My parents organized a private dinner, an event that radiated a cold, almost clinical elegance. My brothers arrived wearing those self-satisfied smiles only people have when they know something good is waiting for them without lifting a finger. My father stood up, cleared his throat, and began a speech about success, family, and gratitude. His eyes shone when he looked at Andrew and Daniel. He said he wanted to reward their vitality and their adventurous spirit. He pulled out 2 thick envelopes, the kind that hold more than just paper. For Andrew, a 3-week trip through the capitals of Europe, all-inclusive 5-star hotels, and a card loaded with funds for personal expenses. For Daniel, a luxury cruise through the Greek islands, in a suite that cost more than most people earn in a year. My brothers hugged, laughed, and toasted. The sound of glasses clinking felt like a hammer striking my chest. I remained seated, hands clasped on the table, waiting. Then my mother looked at me. Her expression didn't change. There was no spark of excitement. She walked to a side table and picked up a small box, wrapped in plain, almost careless paper. She handed it to me with a mechanical smile, the kind people use with strangers in an elevator. "Michael," my father said, "you already have everything you need. You're a practical man. We thought this would be useful for your business trips." I opened the package. Inside was a bar of body soap. It's a generic brand, the kind you find in any discount pharmacy. It wasn't a joke. There was no happy birthday, here's the real gift. That was it. The silence inside my head was deafening, even as outside my brothers kept bragging about their itineraries. I looked at the soap and then at my father. He had already turned away to refill Andrew's glass. He didn't even stay to see my reaction. In that moment, the humiliation wasn't explosive. It was a glacial cold running down my spine. I understood that my 20 years of effort, my sleepless nights saving their finances, and my absolute loyalty had been appraised, and its value was this: a disposable object meant to be used up and thrown away. Andrew walked over, gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder and said, "Well, at least you'll smell nice while you stay in charge of the office, brother." Daniel let out a short laugh. My parents said nothing. Their silence validated the mockery. I stood up without making a sound. My chair didn't scrape against the floor. I left the soap on the table, right next to the glossy travel brochures for my brother's trips. My father asked where I was going. "I need to review some closing accounts," I replied, in a voice so flat I barely recognized it. It was the last time I lied to them out of loyalty. I left that house feeling expelled, not physically but from the circle of their consideration. I was no longer a son, not even a respected employee. I was the servant they took for granted. That same night I returned to the office. I sat at my desk and looked at the folders containing the legal structure of everything they owned. For years, out of love and duty, I had shielded their assets, hidden their bad decisions, and kept companies afloat that, on paper, were already dead. They enjoyed the shine, but I held the structure together. That night I decided that if I was the one holding up the building, I would also be the one to remove the pillars. My symbolic departure from the family was completed when I removed my personal belongings from the company safe. I left the keys to the car the company paid for, a vehicle I had personally maintained with my own salary to avoid extra expenses. I walked through the rain to a taxi, with the bitter taste of betrayal burning my throat. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a terrifying clarity. They had decided I deserved nothing, so I would decide what they deserved. I spent the next 3 weeks with a calm that bordered on surgical precision. Revenge, when cooked slowly, requires a clear mind and a steady hand. My first step wasn't to confront them, it was to disappear. I requested extended medical leave for exhaustion, something my decades-long work record supported without question. They knew the office would be chaos without me, but they were so distracted packing for their trips that they only sent me a text wishing me a speedy recovery so I could return before they came back. I met with an old colleague, a lawyer specializing in corporate structures who knew exactly where the family's financial skeletons were buried. We sat in a grey office with no windows, surrounded by folders. There was no need for many words. He understood the contempt in my eyes. I handed him documents showing how my father had used my name and signature in capital movements that bordered on illegality to cover Andrew's gambling debts and Daniel's failed business ventures. For years, I had accepted being the family's legal shield, believing it was an act of mutual protection. Now that shield would become their greatest threat. My plan wasn't to steal from them. I'm not a thief. It was to stop protecting them. The legal detail they ignored was that most of the assets funding their lifestyles were tied to a partnership I managed, and in which I held a minority but strategic stake. Without my signature to renew credit lines, and without my management to conceal losses from auditors, the house of cards would begin to wobble within days. With the help of my ally, I drafted a series of legal notices. They weren't threats, they were realities. I notified the banks that I would no longer act as personal guarantor for my brother's debts. I informed the board of partners that external audits, the ones I used to polish with efficiency and questionable ethics for the sake of the family name, would now be conducted by an independent firm without any interference from me. I knew that the moment the first auditor stepped into my father's office, the reality behind the luxury trips would turn into a nightmare of legal summons. I watched from a distance with the patience of a hunter. I received calls from my father that I ignored. I received messages from Andrew complaining that his corporate credit card had been declined at a hotel in Paris. I received insults from Daniel because his personal account had been frozen under investigation. I responded to none of them. I was rebuilding my own life, transferring my legitimate savings into accounts beyond their reach, and preparing my final departure. The preparation was invisible. While they posted photos on social media, toasting in front of the Eiffel Tower or on the beaches of Mykonos, I was dismantling the safety net that allowed them to walk over the abyss without falling. Every document I signed withdrawing from their companies was one less brick in their foundation. My revenge was rational, cold, and completely legal. I wasn't breaking the law. I was simply ceasing to be the silent accomplice who allowed them to live like royalty at the cost of my effort and my name. The final strike was ready. A red folder filled with evidence of tax evasion and misappropriation of funds directly involving my brothers was sent anonymously to the appropriate authorities. I didn't do it out of malice, but out of moral justice. They wanted me to be the man of the soap, the man who cleans up everyone else's mess. Well, I was going to clean the family once and for all, but not in the way they expected. The dirt would be exposed to the light of day, and I wouldn't be there to scrub it. My brother's return was the most pathetic spectacle I've ever witnessed. There were no hugs, no travel stories. Andrew landed and was met at the airport by 2 agents from the tax authorities. Daniel, on the other hand, had to leave his designer luggage at the port because his credit card didn't even have enough funds to pay the disembarkation fees. I was in my private office, far from the family building, watching the notifications on my screen with the same coldness with which they had handed me that bar of soap. My father stormed into my new office 2 days later. He didn't ask for permission. His face was flushed. The veins in his neck looked ready to burst. He shouted that I was a traitor, that I had dared to let his sons go through such public humiliation. He demanded that I call my contacts, that I use the influence I had built to fix this misunderstanding. I looked at him from behind my desk, without standing, without blinking. I let the silence stretch until the echo of his shouting faded, and only the sound of his heavy breathing remained. With a slow movement, I pulled from my drawer the bar of soap I had kept in its original wrapping. I placed it on the desk right between us. My father looked at it, confused, as if he didn't remember the object. I told him, in a voice made of pure ice, that my loyalty had been used up. That for years, I had been the one who cleaned their messes, who washed away their guilt, and who kept their names spotless before the world. But that bar of soap had been the clear signal that they considered me disposable. "If you want someone to clean this mess, Father, do it yourself." "You have the soap right there," I said. He tried to slam the desk, but stopped when he saw my expression. There was no anger in my eyes, only absolute indifference. I informed him that the audits were already public, that Andrew's tax debts were documented, and that Daniel's fraud involving company funds could no longer be hidden. I was no longer the administrator of their lies. I handed him my formal resignation from any ties to the family name and businesses. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. Andrew lost his apartment, which had been under the name of one of the companies I liquidated due to insolvency. Daniel had to face embezzlement charges that would keep him in court for years. My parents, who always boasted of their prestige, watched their names appear in the finance and white-collar crime sections of every newspaper. The fortune they believed was endless evaporated in fines, asset seizures, and legal fees from lawyers who weren't even half as efficient as I had been. I watched as panic replaced arrogance on their faces, not out of sadism, but because of the irony of it all. They who felt so superior traveling the world on my money and effort now couldn't even pay the electricity bill at the family mansion. I saw my mother cry, not because she had humiliated me, but because she could no longer maintain appearances. I looked at them all from a distance, from my new freedom, and felt a deep satisfaction. The kings were naked, and I was the only one wearing clothes. There was no mercy. When Andrew called me crying, asking me to co-sign an emergency loan, I simply hung up. When Daniel sought me out to speak to the judges, I reminded him that I was just a practical man, and that I was very busy using my time on useful things. The empire they built on my back collapsed on top of them, and I made sure not to leave a single piece of rubble where they could take shelter. Justice wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It was simply removing my hand and letting gravity do the rest. Today I walk through the streets with a lightness I never knew before. There are no midnight calls to answer, no balance sheets to reconcile to hide someone else's incompetence. My family, or what remains of it, now lives in a reality that always belonged to them, but one I had postponed, the reality of their own limitations. My parents moved into a small apartment, far from the luxuries they once took for granted, and my brothers have discovered that without a protected last name and an open bank account, the world is an extremely hostile place. Andrew now works in a mediocre administrative position, closely monitored, to make sure he doesn't touch a single cent that isn't his. Daniel is buried in debts he won't repay in 3 lifetimes. The most ironic part is that none of them reach out to me anymore. Not because they don't need me, but because my presence reminds them of the exact moment they stopped being masters of the world and became what they always were: empty men. As for me, I don't feel the emptiness many would expect after breaking ties with my own blood. I feel a surgical peace. I've learned that family is a concept many people use to disguise abuse. They tell you that blood is thicker than water, only when they need you to bleed for them. But when the waters are calm and luxury trips are being handed out, blood suddenly becomes invisible. I regret nothing. Some will say I was cruel, that a son should never sink his parents' ship. I say a son is not a slave, and respect cannot be bought with a discount bar of soap while the rest are handed the world on a silver platter. I rebuilt my career on my own terms. I own my time and my name, a name that now represents only me. There are no family dinners, no fake toasts, no hypocrisy at Christmas. There is only silence, and in that silence I found a dignity that no trip to Europe or cruise through the Greek islands could have ever given me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories.